Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about future directions in technology for this year and in the years ahead. To do that, I'm joined by someone who really has their finger in the pulse of what's going on in the tech world. With me is Liz Centoni, Chief Strategy Officer at Cisco. Liz, happy Friday to you. Thanks for being with us today.
Happy Friday, James. Great to be here, and Happy New Year. I think I can say that, right? It's not end of January yet.
I think it's still okay to say Happy New Year. We haven't passed that point yet.
Oh, great. Good to see you.
Yeah. So, all right. So you are the Chief Strategy Officer with the crystal ball, no doubt about it. I'd like to take a look at your 4 key tech trends. You've written these. They're going to define the year 2023, and I would guess they would probably have some longer lasting implications. Trend number 1, new dimensions to the attack surface, which sounds a little ominous because I think the hackers tend to be winning at this point. And one of the points you make about this in this trend is you talk about the importance of quantum cryptography. So I'm guessing that's cryptography that is fueled by quantum computing. So please explain, Liz.
Okay. One of the hardest parts of my job are, how do we look at trends that have a longer term impact to our customers, and how do we monetize those as well, and not just chase the new shiny object, right? Easy to do, like what's the new thing out there. So when we think about new dimensions to it, quantum has been something that we've been looking at for a long time along computing, networking, security as well. And what we really focused on, there's a portion of the team that's really experts at this, it's not me, has been focused more on the research part of it. And then we move it towards what are some of the use cases that, it will come up pretty soon, whether it's in IoT, whether it's in data centers, and really focused on things around transmitting keys. Because today we know that if you look at, some of the biggest fears that we have, or I would have, is that the ability for hackers to be able to harvest a whole bunch of data and using quantum decrypt it later, right? So your entire data set, your entire life can be in the hands of somebody else. It's just, they'll harvest. So in the same way, transmitting keys, can be where keys can be harvested and decrypted later. And while there are certain things that the industry is talking about in terms of quantum, post-quantum cryptography as a potential stopgap, what I hear from the teams is it's possible that these PQC schemes can be broken in the future, right? I mean, I wish we had a crystal ball that tells us how soon, what is that future, near future, a little further out. But what we're looking at and working on, actual work that's happening across the board, is around quantum key distribution. And what we particularly like about that is it avoids the distribution over the keys over an insecure channel, right? So much more to know in this area, and you'll see us talk about it more as more of the use cases become live. That's what excites me in terms of where you take the technologies that were coming up. And you can use this, whether it's in IoT, whether it's in autonomous systems, whether it's in data centers, for example. So you'll hear us talk about that a bit more on, especially around quantum cryptography, as more of that work and our engagement with customers come about. In talking with customers as part of our global customer advisory board, I think in prior sessions that we've had with some of our key customers, quantum has remained more of it's in research, it's something that's way out there. But now we hear more about, okay, tell me more and how we work together. We're exchanging ideas. We're doing this with academia as well around there's real life use cases coming about, especially in the area of cryptography.
Interesting, because I do hear more about quantum in the last, say, year or so. It seems like it's definitely growing. All right, but trend number 2 that you wrote, experience economy and business insights. And as part of this trend, you talked about edge native application development frameworks. I guess I'd like to hear you explain the point, but also my related question is, where are we with edge computing these days? Liz, please.
I would say is edge use cases. I pretty much, my mental model, James, works around use cases, right? Because you look at this as, there's a lot of things that we can theoretically kind of talk about and research around, but edge use cases are growing. I used to run our IoT business some time back, and when we talked about edge and edge intelligence, it was primarily related to what you could do in terms of connecting and securing factories, what you could do in utilities, what you can do in oil and gas, what you could do in mining. We've evolved that into retail. I mean, think about your experience, if you like, going into I love retail therapy. The experience is quite different now than it used to be before. right? So all of this is really around how do I take the data that's generated there and then and process the data there and hopefully find a way to only backhaul the data that I really need to keep versus backhauling the whole thing out. So I would say is that edge intelligence and kind of this edge application development frameworks, I think those are critical around how do we become smarter around collecting these, processing it, and driving insights closer to where it's needed, whether that is in all of these IoT heavy industries I talked about, or retail, media, and entertainment. I do believe, and please, this is, if I can recall this, it's like Avatar 2 took a long time to make. From what I hear from James Cameron talking about it, a lot of it was done with people doing the rendering of, or I don't know if I'm using the right word, remotely, right? So when you talk about the edge computing capacity, the bandwidth, the low latency that's required, the number of use cases are just exploding. So the whole thing, for us, when we look at that is, what are the application development frameworks that are needed at the edge for the developers to build that? And there's things around data management, there's things around compliance and security. Are there not kind of new AI ML tool chains that could be used as well? And I think that while, edge is going to be a little bit more complicated because of a combination of existing infrastructure and cloud native infrastructure, a little bit different from a centralized cloud. And so I think more and more what we'll see is these frameworks, will they be customized to use cases? And is the underlying hardware that's going to be different and the software stack is going to be the same? Those are the things when I talk about edge native application development frameworks. I think we'll see development and growing adoption of these as well, because the edge use cases more and more have become a lot more mainstream than they were last year.
Interesting, because I thought, in the year 2022, I couldn't really believe, it felt like edge was really exploding. And I thought, 2022 was the year of edge. Maybe it's actually 2023. I don't know if this question is answerable. Is there a way, what is your sense of the adoption curve of edge? Are we there yet, or will we be there in the next couple of years? Your sense?
I would say it's ramping up. And the question is how you define edge, right? I mean, when I was in IoT, we used to define it as what's carpeted and non-carpeted. Carpeted was pretty much your enterprise environment. Anything outside of that, you could say is kind of at the edge of your network, whether it's a parking lot, whether it is a mine, whether it is a factory. And so I would say is, if you look at IoT as an example, and when you talk about factories that are out there being connected for a number of reasons, everything from use cases around remote monitoring to getting more efficient, getting more quality done, like when you're in the development, not when the widget or the car is already produced and then you're trying to figure out how do you do quality control. These are all edge use cases. I think that would explode a lot more in this year. And I think in some ways, the pandemic taught us that more and more rapid adoption of technology helps you kind of drive your digitization and stay ahead of this curve much faster. So I think some of the things that were started off will probably have, or efforts that were started will probably ramp up in kind of their adoption and acceleration of those projects.
All right, so trend number 3, your take on the year ahead. Next phase of smart connectivity and networks, and in particular, you talk about multi-cloud realignment. So what does multi-cloud realignment have to do with smart connectivity?
So when I look at multi-cloud realignment, right? I mean, if I think about over the last 6 months to now and talking with customers, they're getting a lot more crisp on their multi-cloud strategy, for example. It's not just a all cloud or all on-prem. It's a question of, how do I have a strategy that looks at cost, looks at flexibility, looks at velocity, looks at choice, and make decisions on where I want to place my workloads and applications. And by the way, data sovereignty, all of that, kind of come into consideration as well. More and more as we see more nationalism versus globalism as well. We'll see more of that regulatory risk management. So I think the aspects around when you even think about multi-cloud, right? It's like a connecting your campus, data center to the cloud, and then cloud to cloud as well.
Right.
Just on, kind of how do you, again, have an environment where you can automate this, the analytics that you're getting, where you can drive a common policy across all of it? I think that's the piece of when we talk about smart connectivity. And how do you bring more predictive into this as well, right? There is not about addressing issues in real time or near real time. Some of the things that we're doing internally around predictive is, again, modeling what could potentially happen based on data and we've collected and behaviors that we've seen as well. So I think predictive will play a bigger role around the connectivity, the security, the observability in the multi-cloud phase. And I think I know our customers will demand this as they see where they're getting much more defined on their multi-cloud strategy, whether it's multiple clouds and private clouds or a single cloud, public cloud, and their own private cloud. And when I look at private cloud and on-premises, I see edge as part of it as well. Right. So
there's no doubt in terms of predictive, it feels like artificial intelligence will play a role in that, which brings us to our last trend number 4, building a better, more inclusive future for all. In particular, you talk about the idea of responsible AI. I mean, there's moments where I could feel, not as optimistic about that. Like we might not end up with a responsible AI. Do you think there's a case for optimism here?
There is. I would say we're still early innings where AI is concerned. Right? When I think of kind of the awesome set of use cases that we can drive from that, that's great. And if you look at the new buzz around generative AI,
right?
And as people talk about kind of OpenAI and ChatGPT, there's so much that you can do in terms of, look, your AI is now actually creating stuff, essays, books, code, images, etc. It brings on a different, another dimension around the aspects of privacy, security, transparency, copyright, stuff that AI can create. On the other hand, it's also derived from prior art from someone else. So I think this is something where it's something that the industry, developers, governments need to come together to look at it and go, how do we, again, I think there'll be a lot more focus on this because the ecosystem will demand it. It's not something that you can govern from over the top. And maybe I'm being more hopeful and more positive than what will ultimately be, James. But I do think that this is one where I'd like to say, we're all guardians of this and guardians of that galaxy. And this will, the ability, when I look at this, the ability, especially of generative AI to co-create. I'm not sitting in the world thinking that'll do my job for me, but if it can co-create, that would be awesome. But then I have the responsibility to make sure that it is the ethical part of it in terms of how the insights are used. Does it tie to how I intended the model or algorithm to work in the first place? How am I collecting the data? Do the users know what the data is going to be used? And I think as an industry, we all have a responsibility to be able to do that. How we go about kind of getting the industry to come together, I don't have a great idea yet, but I think that with more and more focus on the new buzz on generative AI, I'm hopeful and I'm thinking that this will come more and more to the forefront where more and more companies will be thinking about not just for their own developers, but what do we do as a community? And with now that, if you think about Stable Diffusion and, more in terms of where they're looking to democratize stuff is my way of putting it and making it more open source. This is a responsibility for all of us.
Yeah, I think you're very right in terms of there's been a groundswell of movement. There's people really are wanting, demanding responsibility in artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of question about ethics and explainability. And can you tell why the machine learning algorithm turned me down for the loan or accepted the loan? We need to understand that. And I guess the other part of that is it's going to be, as you mentioned, also I don't think there's really an industry body that is going to regulate that. So the question is, how is it going to be regulated? And yeah, I do feel I feel the energy throughout the industry. We need to regulate this somehow. I'm not sure what my question is. It just feels like we're at a bit of a turning point in this issue.
I agree. And there are times that I know we at Cisco have to think more because we have a framework that includes for our own development teams includes principles around the transparency, the fairness, the privacy, the security, the accountability. we're going to add the copyright piece to, so I'm hoping as well. How do we get others in the industry to join us as well and do this collectively? Because like, we both chatted on, I don't think a top-down mandate is going to work, because they most often than not don't work, because, how do you coalesce a group of individuals and corporations and governments to do this on a global basis? It's going to be tough.
Liz, I think you said it. Fascinating stuff, and it's going to be really interesting to watch it all unfold in the years ahead. I hope you come back again with some more of your predictions.
I'd love to. And as always, good to chat with you.